Hi everyone and welcome to the Empowered You podcast. I'm Javi Israel, your host, speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. After October 7, I found myself in uncomfortable situations, not sure how to respond or navigate. That's why I created the Empowered You, first an organization and now a podcast to equip you with the knowledge, skills, and tools surrounding Israel and your Jewish identity. In each episode, we'll explore various topics from multiple perspectives so that you can feel informed, empowered, and proud of who you are. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Welcome back to the Empowered You podcast. I'm so excited for you to hear today's conversation with Marnie Perlstein. Marnie has become one of Australia's leading voices speaking out against anti-Semitism, challenging misinformation, and advocating for the Jewish community. But beyond everything she shares online, I really wanted to get to know the person behind the platform and hear the story that led her to become such a powerful advocate. In this episode, we talk about Marnie's journey, what inspired her to find her voice, how her Jewish identity has shaped who she is, and why she believes that speaking up has never been more important. We also discuss the current climate, the challenges facing our community, and what it truly means to be an empowered Jew in today's world. If you enjoy this episode, I'd love for you to follow the Empowered Jew podcast and leave a rating or a review and share it with someone who you think would enjoy this conversation. Every follow, review, and like helps us reach more people and continue empowering our community. And before we jump in, a little announcement. This is our second last episode of the Empowered You podcast as you know it. We'll be wrapping up with our 50th episode, I still can't believe I'm saying that, before launching an exciting new chapter. What's your story? It will still be the Empowered You podcast, but with a fresh new series and a different twist on things. I can't wait to share more details with you, so stay tuned. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Marnie Perlstein. Hello, Marnie Perlstein.
Javi, hello.
It is so great to have you on the Empowered You podcast. You are a powerhouse, and it's really a privilege. So thank you for making the time. Before we begin and hear about all the amazing things that you do, we've got to go back to the very beginning. Tell us about your childhood. Where were you born and raised, and about your family background?
I'm going to tell you all of that, but Javi, first, I want to thank you for having me here. And I also want to say that I feel that I should be the one interviewing you and hearing your incredible story of resilience, especially with Bondi. So it actually means so much to me that you're talking to me about my story, because I feel like naturally it should be the other way around. But to go back to my childhood, I was born in Melbourne. I am a second generation Jewish Australian on my mum's side. Her parents left Poland right before the Holocaust, and they met each other on the boat traveling to Australia. So I was raised in Melbourne, and I had a beautiful family upbringing. We were quite traditional. I wouldn't say my family were not religious. My grandparents were traditional, sort of observant in their own way, but not fully religious. And it felt like a really beautiful childhood.
That is so nice. I've never heard someone just say, I had the most beautiful childhood.
It was not without issues. It was not unflawed. You know, it wasn't perfect, that's for sure. But in terms of the family I had around me, my grandparents and my auntie, I had beautiful people around me.
And that is everything. It shapes
Yeah.
who you are. And I feel like also in the work that you do, which we're going to get to, you need to have a strong foundation and you need to have thick skin. And I feel like you must have gotten that from the people that you grew up around, your grandparents, your parents, and your community. They've obviously shaped who you are. I'm actually curious because you just said that your grandparents met on the boat when they left Poland. Did they still have family that were left in Poland, in Europe during the Shoah, or did the whole family all manage to leave?
No, they both still had family. When I think of them, I think of them as pioneers and crusaders in the sense that they were early to leave. Like they were smart enough, and they didn't know each other in Poland. Obviously, they met on the boat. My grandfather traveled on his own. He left his entire family behind. My grandmother was with her parents and her siblings, but they left relatives behind. My grandfather, in particular, ended up losing 3 siblings in the Holocaust. And I didn't know about that until quite recently. And I've only started really thinking in the last few years, more than the last few years, but I've been thinking a lot about what they left behind and how hard it must have been to travel on a boat for months to a country on the other side of the world where they did not speak the language and literally start all over again.
Yeah, yeah, wow. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to
Well,
not
they
only.
did it, and I think, when it comes down to survival, people do it. I've been thinking a lot about it just in terms of where we're at now as Jewish people in the diaspora, and if we would ever need to leave Australia or America or Canada, France, England, what that entails. It's not an easy thing.
No, no, it's not. And it's crazy that we're even having these thoughts and these conversations. You would think that in 2026, the world would have learnt from the past and that Jewish people would finally just be able to live their lives in peace. But as Mark Twain famously says, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes and the story continues. Just going back to your childhood, tell us about your schooling. What school did you go to?
I the first school I went to was Glamorgan, which is Geelong Grammar Junior School, which is a Church of England school. It was a very progressive school, which is, I believe, why my parents chose it, because if you were bright, you could be extended, and you could, if you were in year 2, but you were some kind of child genius, you could do year 4 or 5 maths if that was what was required. It was a very open school. You were allowed to go with a group of students and a teacher across the road to buy your lunch so that you would learn about paying for things and receiving the right amount of change. Like everything was very practical. But it was a Church of England school, and I was placed in the church choir, and I was singing in a church choir, and that seemed very jarring when I would get to my grandparents' traditional Jewish home on a Friday night for Shabbat dinner. It just seemed very incongruous. And I think it got pretty tricky there because I started to be singled out for being Jewish, and a lot of the kids there were calling me bloody Jew, and they were calling me names for being Jewish. And I wasn't the only Jewish kid there. There were actually a lot of Jewish kids there, but we were singled out, definitely. And that's when I started to feel that maybe I did not belong there. And it took me a couple of years to convince my parents to send me to a Jewish day school. So I ended up at Mount Scopus, which is where I went through all of high school.
So your whole primary school was at this Church of England school, and then for high school you moved to Scopus.
Pretty much with a year at Bialik, somewhere in the middle in grade 6.
Oh, okay. When you moved to Mount Scopus, I'm curious because you had Jewish kids in the school that you were in, but now you're in a Jewish school. Did you finally feel like, I belong? What was the feeling going from a non-Jewish school to a Jewish school?
Apart from the fear and discomfort of the things that I hadn't learnt in primary school that all of these other kids had learnt, which was basically Hebrew and a lot of Jewish studies, but I had an innate sense of cultural Judaism from my home life. I just felt like, these are my people, this is my place, this is my school. I just love this place. These are my people. And I felt like that from the beginning. And to this day, and I won't say exactly how many years I have been out of school, Javi, but those people are still my people, And the friends that I made there, my closest friends from there, are still my closest friends today. And it's many decades later.
Isn't that so beautiful? And they say there's nothing like childhood friends.
There's nothing like it. And I see it now with where my kids are at school and the friendships that they are making at their school in Sydney. And I really hope, and I do believe it will be the same thing, just these foundational friendships that extend beyond the friendship and they extend to siblings, you know, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. You start to learn an entire family. And, you know, this is what makes community. And this is why we're so great. You know, I just don't think other schools have inbuilt communities or create communities from their schools in the same way. That's why I love the Jewish day school system and why I have been obsessed with it from the time that I was at Scopus throughout the rest of my life.
Yeah. And I actually feel like because you went to a non-Jewish school in your primary days, it made you appreciate even more being in a Jewish day school environment.
It definitely did. I never, ever took it for granted. Every little thing was exciting and interesting to me. Whether it was, you know, the best day of the year at school was always Purim, the leadership program, just everything about it I loved, to the point, Javi, where even 10 years after leaving university and having a career, I went back to Mount Scopus and worked as their first marketing manager for 3 years and then loved it as much, if not more, as a staff member. I just felt so grateful to be in that beautiful environment with such good people and these beautiful kids.
You know, I can actually relate to you because I feel the same way about my school that I grew up in, which was Beth Rivka. And I loved Beth Rivka with all my heart and soul. And it was my safe space, especially later on in my life. School was my safe space. And I gave a whole speech at my graduation about how much I love Beth Rivka and why I love Beth Rivka. And I literally laid out the different reasons as to why. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. And the plan was always to live in Melbourne, to send my children to Beth Rivka, to teach at Beth Rivka. Like I was so obsessed with Beth Rivka. And then man plans and God laughs. And I live in Sydney. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be living in Sydney. I know Melbourne and Sydney are not that far away, but it's like two different universes.
Sounds like I could be talking, Javi. This is exactly what I say, that never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined that I would be living in Sydney. And my whole dream in life was to send my kids to Mount Scopus Memorial College. And Gary, I used to say to my husband, can't we build some kind of bullet train that could get them there express so that they could still go there? But I'm very happy with I'm very, very happy with Mariah in Sydney.
Yeah. And Mariah, I'm a teacher here. It's an excellent school. And I do feel like the kids get a lot that they do at Scopus as well, and that sense of community and Judaism and Zionism. Did you take a gap year? Because Scopus is a pretty Zionistic school. Did you feel like you wanted to have that experience in Israel? Tell us about your life after school, before you met Gary.
I did take a gap year. I did, but I didn't do a program. I went to Israel. I spent a couple of months in Israel. I didn't feel that I wanted to be locked in to a program. So I wasn't one of those kids that felt, well, I didn't want to be committed to having to be in any particular place at any particular time on my gap year. So I started in Israel and spent time there and loved it, and then traveled for another probably 8 or 10 months. And when I came back to Melbourne, I did media studies, which was a communications degree at RMIT. And from there, I actually went into the PR communications industry and worked in consumer and corporate PR for about 10 years, both in Melbourne. Also, I did a year in LA and a year in London.
That is so cool. You only live one life, and it's so nice to be able to have opportunities to explore and live in different places. When you were living in London and LA, were you connected to the Jewish communities there?
Such a good question. When I lived in London, I actually had a boyfriend there. I had moved there for a relationship with a guy who was Persian, Jewish Persian. His family had escaped Iran as the Shah was coming in. And I didn't feel connected to the community that he wasn't strongly connected with a Jewish community. So I found my own shul to go to in London. It wasn't the shul that he attended on the high holidays. I felt that he was very disconnected compared to what mattered to me. And actually the relationship didn't survive. And that was one of the main reasons. I didn't feel connected enough, and I was never going to. I went to shul on the high holidays. I had a lot of Jewish friends in LA, but I didn't feel connected to a community in the way that I did in Melbourne or in the way that I do in Sydney. Because I think you really need something to anchor you to a community. And I think, so you either need, a school life, children, family life, extended friends and family. And I also think we don't understand how lucky we are in Australia, because we actually have small but super tight and mighty communities. And in LA and in London, everything is much more spread out. There are, the communities are much bigger. I just feel like we have really accessible communities, really. If you are somehow especially connected to the school system, or if you have a shul here, it's very insular.
Yeah, it is. And it's special. The Australian Jewish communities, predominantly in Melbourne and Sydney, are small but mighty, and we make a huge difference. We really,
Yeah.
really do. And that's why everything that's going on, it's a huge deal. Even though we're actually smaller in numbers than other places in the world, in other places in the world, they also have anti-Semitism. We're going to discuss about the extreme flip. But I also feel our communities, we are small but really mighty, and we are contributors and we are builders. And what's happening to us is something we've never experienced like this before. I know I'm jumping. I'm curious to know, what does Judaism mean to you?
I have thought of it before. I think of it all the time. Essentially, to me, it means belonging, because my formative childhood experience was at a school where, because I was Jewish, I was made to feel that I didn't belong. And then to have the experience of entering a Jewish school where instantly I felt like I belonged, because I was in the majority. We were the majority. It's exactly the same feeling I get when I'm in Israel, that I instantly feel like I belong there because we're the majority there. And Judaism for me, it's just, I don't know even how to put it into words. It's a sense of belonging. It's a guideline. It's a sense of having guidelines through which to live my life. And I'm not a religious person, but I do feel that it gives me an incredible moral framework. And it gives me such a framework for so many aspects of my life. And it's just something I'm really, really proud of. I'm just proud of being Jewish. I always have been. I've always been that person that's been really openly Jewish. Like, even when I went from university into the workforce, I was just always that person that told the entire office that I was Jewish and wanted to share that with people and explain what that meant to people. And it's something I'm inherently proud of.
I love that. You're truly an empowered Jew. And you know how you said you're not religious? I'm thinking, what are you talking about, Marnie? Like, what does it even mean to be religious? You are so connected to your people, to God. Like, hello, you're like one of the most religious Jews I've met. Like,
I love that you frame it like that. I think for people like me that didn't grow up in observant homes, we label ourselves as not being religious. And I love that people who I would view as religious would, like, you can say to me, that's just ridiculous. Well, I don't keep kosher. I don't, I don't do a lot of the things that are prescriptive. But I do feel very close to my culture, to the religion, to our ethnicity, to all of the parts of it. But if I had to define myself or label myself, I would say, you know, I'm far from an observant Jew.
Well, as an observant Jew, I don't even know what that means. So there you have it. I also can connect to you because somehow I always need to let people know that I'm Jewish. My mother too, where we just have to bring it in some way. I mean, my last name now is Israel. My legal name is Chava. People are like, Chava, am I saying that right? And then I'm like, well, actually, it's Chava, you know, Adam and Eve in the Bible. I love bringing in my Judaism. And I think one of the best ways of being empowered Jews is being a mensch and people knowing that you're Jewish, because just being a good person and also people knowing that you're Jewish, you don't even know the impact that that can make. Where people are like, oh, wow, I just interacted with someone and had a really lovely conversation and they're Jewish. Hey, you know, maybe those Jewish people are not so bad after all.
I think because we're such a small group of people globally, and particularly in Australia, where our numbers are so tiny. We only make up 0.5% of the population here, which is so insignificant. So people have all these perceptions. They've always had certain perceptions of what Jewish people are like. But the reality is that the majority of Australians have never met a Jewish person.
Mm-hmm.
So unless they're meeting someone Jewish, they have nothing to go on. And it is such an inherent part of my identity. It's the primary part of my identity. So why would I want to hide that from people? I feel like if they don't know that about me, then they don't know me and they can't know me. They won't get me at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So tell us, so you end up meeting your husband Gary and you end up moving to Sydney. You're
Yeah.
still working in the PR. You're not on social media.
No, actually, I'm not working in PR. By this stage, I've done 3 years at Mount Scopus as their marketing manager. So I've now started to merge my marketing communications background with Jewish education. And I, much to my own horror, moved to Sydney to be with my future husband. I cannot believe that I'm going to be living in Sydney. And the first job I had in Sydney was actually with Academy BJE. I worked for the Board of Jewish Education. So I feel like I morphed into this kind of Jewish educational space. And it's obviously because I had such a deep love personally for Jewish day school education myself. My own experience at Scopus was just so amazing. I don't feel in many ways like I was ever the same after I left that environment, because it was just such a pure and beautiful environment. And I felt like you get ejected out into this sort of very cold world, and it's very, very different. And so part of me wanted to stay in that environment. So I worked for the Board of Jewish Education, which was it is a great organisation. They obviously, they send Jewish educators out into in New South Wales state schools. And I think that's an amazing thing. It's getting harder and harder for people to give their kids a Jewish day school education. So for those that have their kids in regional areas or in state schools, it's a really great thing that their kids can have some Jewish content. And that was how my working life started in Sydney.
And then how did you get into social media? Tell us about that journey.
I started in advocacy way before I got into social media. I am a typical dinosaur when it comes to anything electronic and new forms of media, even though I'm obsessed with media because that was my whole working background. But I started to realize at some point during COVID that we had a growing problem in Australia, and it was starting to feel more intense, a growing problem with anti-Semitism. And I think it was this combination of feeling like the online space had become very ugly, and I was just seeing a lot of anti-Israel sentiment online, which happened. I think a few things happened at once, Javi. I think there was the very, very severe lockdowns in Australia where we were stuck at home in a way that no other country in the world was locked up. We were really literally locked up in Australia, and people were sitting all day on social media, and many of them were miserable and they were just being radicalized. And I think that was the first thing. And then I think the second thing was that there was a 10-day conflict where in 2021, and Israel went into Gaza. And as soon as that happened, online, it just started to explode. The anti-Israel sentiment started to explode. It didn't matter that the Palestinians had been attacking Israel first. It didn't matter that it was defensive. None of that mattered. And then things started to evolve with popular culture. And you had Kanye West saying he was going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews. And there just seemed to be this craziness happening. And I remember a few of us got together and we were saying, there were 4 of us actually, and interestingly, we've all gone on to do great things, but individually. We had planned on working as a group and that never happened. But, you know, the other 3 guys are all doing amazing things themselves. But we were saying, you know, we need to figure out what's going on in this country and we need to figure out what we can do to bring it to people's attention. And we had a lot of different ideas. They didn't eventuate, but I went on a mission to try and understand what the gaps were in Australia. I went to Israel to understand exactly, you know, I wanted to understand more about what was happening in Israel. I met with different organizations in different, you know, international cities that were already working on anti-Semitism. And there were 2 things that I wanted to do in Australia. And the one thing that I really wanted to do that I still want to do was to go into corporate Australia through a diversity, equity, inclusion lens. I don't love the DEI movement at all, but I thought it would be a way in the door because every corporate company in Australia was talking to people from the LGBTQ community. They were talking to people about women's rights. They were talking about Indigenous rights, about rights of the disabled. And I wanted to go in there and talk about Jewish civil rights in this country because I didn't think that anybody had met a Jew. And I also didn't think that people had any understanding of the fact that when I was dropping my kids at school, there were armed guards outside the school, or that I couldn't go to our place of worship and pray in a synagogue without having to have some serious security outside. I wanted people to understand what was going on in the online space. I could already see that the university space was really damaged. So that was what I was looking at doing. At the same time, I was working alongside a think tank called the Blueprint Institute. It's an Australian think tank organisation, and they had a non-Jewish CEO who had been working in the education sector for a decade with an education minister, and he really believed that we had an institutional anti-Semitism problem in the education sector and we needed quick and swift change. So there were all of these sort of things coming together. I was also doing a bit of work with Open Door Media in America. They're an online Jewish content creation company who do incredible YouTube videos, podcasts, all kinds of different, well, we know from Amplified, they run the Amplified program. So I'd been already working with them. So I was already sort of just really navigating the anti-Semitism space and trying to work out, should I start an organisation? Should I continue working alongside some of these other organisations? And that's when October 7 happened.
When you saw what went on in Israel and the response, what was your feelings when you saw those people, I don't even want to call them protesters, those people storming outside the Opera House, chanting the chants, burning the Israeli flag? What was your response?
Well, let's go back to October 7, which for me should have been the single worst day of any Jewish person, any Israeli person's life in this generation. That should have been the worst day, full stop, end it there. And then I would have expected that the world would defend us, that they would be on our side, that the world would condemn Hamas, that the world would try and support Israel in whatever actions were taken next. So we would have been left dealing with the emotional fallout of October 7, and that would have been hard enough. It would have been pretty tough, actually. It was a pretty rough day and a very shocking event. But then, as you said, you know, we go on to October the 8th in Australia, where we have a Muslim cleric on the streets of Western Sydney saying it's a day of victory and a day of celebration, moving on to the night where we have the steps of the Opera House. And I realised actually the tragedy was what unfolded after. For Australian Jews, the tragedy for us was actually what unfolded afterwards. And I remember just feeling disgusted and shocked, and a little stupid, actually. It's like, well, this has been brewing in our backyard. What have we been doing? Where have we been? And why is our government letting these people just get away with this?
Yeah. So what did you decide to do next?
I was just furious, and I didn't know where to put my anger. And at this stage on social media, I didn't understand social media, but I didn't know where to vent my anger. I had 1,000 followers on Instagram. They were all personal friends and family. And I just pressed record on the camera, and I can't even remember what I was talking about on that first reel, but I just pressed it. And from there, I remember someone ringing me and saying, look, if you're going to do this, if you're going to do reels, you need to understand hashtags. You need to understand a few basics of Instagram. You need to understand a reel versus a story, how things differ. And so I just kept talking, and very, very quickly, by some bizarre miracle, the algorithm just picked up my videos and ran with them. And I remember in a matter of a couple of weeks, I went from 1,000 to 4,000 followers on Instagram. And then I got a phone call on a Sunday morning, and it was my best friend in Melbourne. She's actually lives in Sydney, but she was in Melbourne for the weekend. And she rang me and she said, Deborah Messing just shared your reel. And I thought that was a joke. I thought she was joking. I thought it was a very big joke. But it was true. Deborah Messing, the American actress, had shared my reel. And then the numbers just started going up again. And I posted a follow-up video saying, if Deborah Messing in New York is finding my content, and I am a nothing, nobody, woman in Sydney with 4,000 followers, then there are not enough people out there doing this work, and you all need to start speaking up, because Deborah Messing I shouldn't be on her radar. I just should not be on her radar. And the numbers just kept going up, 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 up. And then, that's how it started, essentially. Wow. And it's been a steep learning curve since then.
I bet. Do you feel like posting on social media and putting out to the universe issues that are going on, which are very real issues and the world needs to know, do you feel like social media actually causes change? Does it make a difference?
I've got a very long answer. There's a lot of ways to answer this question. There are days where I feel like, what's the point? It can't be making a difference. But I want to give you a few examples of why I do believe it's making some difference. I'm not changing the world, and I'm certainly not changing the hearts and minds of people who hate us. But what I will say is that after Bondi happened, and Anthony Albanese said that he would not give us a Commonwealth Royal Commission, I started a petition urging the government to create a Commonwealth Royal Commission. And because I was able to promote that on social media, it didn't take long to get 94,000 signatures. So that's the power of social media. And then I'll give you another example. When you have a reel that goes viral, or even just a reel that gets, an unusually large number of views, that the majority of people seeing that reel are not Jewish, and they're really learning something. So a couple of days ago, I had a reel, and I think it's sitting at 127,000 views right now. But when I looked at all of the comments on that reel, the first 15 or 20 comments are not from Jewish people. So when I see that, I know that I'm reaching people that are not necessarily part of our Jewish echo chamber. They may be politically aligned with us, but they are not part of the Jewish echo chamber. And therefore, I do believe it makes a difference. And the other thing is, even if it really made no difference, I would feel like we have to have a voice on social media to counter the misinformation that's being put up and put out against us. And if we're not at least trying, then we might as well just lie down and say, well, it's all over.
I could not agree with you more. And I think that there's so many different avenues and everyone has to do obviously what works for them. Not everyone is up for the influencer life, creating content, putting their face. It's also a very public setting where you're like, one reel, 127K people are watching and millions maybe of people have watched you, know your name, know what you look like. It's definitely tough. And have you ever, I'm assuming, and I think I've even seen that you have received death threats and other things. How do you sleep at night?
I have received threats. I do receive hate messages every single day. I like to tell myself that they are the fringe dwellers of society and that they exist in the extreme parts of society and that they are the sad losers who are sitting at home with nothing better to do in their life other than troll a Jewish woman. If the threats are threatening, I report them. How do I sleep at night? I sleep well at night because, the way I think, Javi, is that my grandparents, when they arrived from Poland and when they sat here and they just watched their people get slaughtered and murdered, they never said a thing. I never knew until a few years ago when I happened to be given a family history of some sorts that was written by a relative in Israel, that I had that my grandfather had 3 siblings who died in the Holocaust. That generation of Jewish people, they just didn't speak about what they went through. And while it was about to happen, I feel that they had no way of speaking up for themselves because their situation was so awful. We have the privilege of social media. We have the privilege of being able to say whatever we want in this society. And therefore, in honor of them and that generation, I'm going to say it. And I don't mind if people don't like me for it. That's fine. You can not like me. But if I don't say anything and if none of us say anything, then we're just letting people willfully hate us and we're not fighting back. And that's not acceptable. We've seen where that leads.
Yeah, we have. And I feel the same. The physical resistance, the spiritual resistance, the online resistance. Once upon a time, Jewish blood was cheap. It was. And that's why all the atrocities were able to happen to us with no repercussions. And unfortunately, history is repeating itself in the way of hating on the Jews, which unfortunately is nothing new. It's the oldest hatred. And we now are so blessed that we live in a time. In this way, I'm optimistic, where we finally have our home, our country, Israel. We finally have our army, the IDF, the Tzahal, who are defending not only Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, but Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, not only living in Israel, but the whole world, Jews in the diaspora included. And also we have agency where we are able to use our voice. And so we have to. And I feel like I don't have a choice. What other choice do I have to just sit in my little shtetl, which I love? And I love being in my little shtetl, even though Sydney, it's not the same shtetl like Melbourne, I'll be honest with you. The Melbourne one's, I don't want to say better, but it's different. And that's why I love Shabbos, because Shabbos is when I actually do shut off from the world. And I am in my little shtetl, in my little echo chamber. But I agree with you completely that we have to use our voice. And
Avi, it's not to guilt anybody who is not able to or who doesn't. It's not for everybody. Social media is an ugly space, but what I would say is that everybody has to do whatever they can. And I heard a comedian actually today was making a joke that all we really have to do as an act of Jewish defiance is just to stay alive and breathe. Okay, so just whatever it is, whether it's lighting Shabbat candles, whether it's just being part of some kind of Jewish event, whether it's just keeping up with the news, whatever it is, whatever the small thing is that each person can do. It doesn't have to be speaking up publicly. It may be just speaking to one individual person when you happen to meet somebody new and you think that they're a tolerant, reasonable person, and you just tell them that you're Jewish and tell them how it feels right now to be Jewish in Australia, then you've done your bit. Social media is not something I would encourage most people to do.
100%. How do you manage social media and being a mum and just living your life? You have a very busy life aside from social media. Your husband, Gary, is the president of the UIA. You, thank God, a beautiful Jewish family. How do you balance it all?
Oh, I've shelved a lot of things, to be honest. A lot of things have just gone over the last few years. Less of a social life, less trips to see my family in Melbourne, less traveling, much more focus on this because I just feel like it's so important, and it's the timing is urgent. We don't have time to muck around. But I mean, my first priority is always my kids and my husband. I'm a mum of 21-year-old and 18-year-old boys. And that is my first priority. And in terms of balancing that, it's really hard because, they don't love what I'm doing, and I don't blame them. It's very intense for them to live with myself and Gary. We're always talking about this topic. We're so passionate about Israel and about, Jewish, the Jewish diaspora situation. And sometimes it's really a lot for them. So I try and edit a lot of what I'm saying at home now. It's hard to balance it, but I also know that hopefully it's really rubbing off and they're going to be like us in some way. They already are very, very proudly Jewish. Wherever they travel, wherever they go, they wear Magen David. So I just, you know what it's like, hubby, because you have a baby. So you're dealing with children on the other end of the spectrum. That always comes first, but you also want to lead as a parent by example.
Mm. Yeah. Do you ever feel, because you and Gary are immersed in all the intensity of everything that's going on, and obviously there's also a lot of good and you see the best in people. Unfortunately, the worst can also bring out the best. But do you ever feel like you get yourself into a negative funk? You're just like seeing all this horrible things that are going on and this politician or this, that, and does it ever consume you in a negative way personally?
There are times that it does and that it has. For me, much more than Gary. And he says this to me, he's in the Israel space. He's doing great things with Israel, which is it's an amazing, whatever it's been through, it's an incredible country, and it's a great, UAA is a beautiful organization. I'm in the social media space predominantly. If I'm not doing like a panel or a talk or a podcast like this where there is something interesting and optimistic to talk about, I'm in a very, very negative space. And sometimes it does put me in a bit of a funk because honestly, if I compare what I used to see on social media after October 7, and let's remember that now the news cycle runs very quickly. It's a 24/7 news cycle. So after October 7, I was not sleeping. I was trying to be on a global news cycle, and I was averaging maybe 3 hours sleep a night, just trying to keep up with everything. But what we're seeing now, there is so much more to keep up with now than there was 2.5, 3 years ago, because the anti-Semitism has increased so much that just trying to keep up with Australia alone is now a full-time job. Forget what's going on with, the war with Iran, America and Israel, forget what's happening with Lebanon, forget what's happening with anti-Semitism in any other country in the world. Just trying to keep up with what is happening in this country is a full-time job. And actually my work, the focus has really shifted in the last 6 months since Bondi. I've become much more Australia focused, and my audience is actually more Australian than it used to be. I used to have much more of an international audience, and I would speak about anti-Semitism more broadly and more globally. But since Bondi, Australia's just become even crazier than it was before.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about Bondi. I want to know, when you heard about Bondi, where were you and were you surprised?
When I heard about Bondi, I had been away for the weekend with Gary's extended family for my mother-in-law's milestone birthday. And we came back late afternoon on Sunday, and we were being picked up from our home at 3:30 the next morning to get a 6 a.m. flight to Israel. So this was the afternoon of the 14th of December, and we were leaving on the morning of the 15th of December to go to Israel. And we hadn't packed yet. So we got home to pack. And as I was trying to pack and get organized, I could see messages coming through on my phone. And I said, Gary, turn the television on and just see what is going on. Was I surprised? No, I was not surprised at all. I was shocked, horrified, but not surprised. I mean, I really believed and had been trying to say for so long that this is where it was all heading. And I remember just at about 1:30 in the morning saying to Gary, we cannot go anywhere. Like, we can't leave this community. We're not going to go to Israel because we can't, and we cancelled. We didn't go. It was just, I was paralyzed, actually. I don't know, it's a whole conversation, Javi, but I feel like I need to ask you the questions because you were there and you survived Bondi. So you would have a much more visceral emotional response to Bondi because you lived through it in real time. I feel like for me, I had so much of my emotional energy had been given to Israel that when Bondi happened, I was honestly so devastated that I thought, I don't know how to emotionally engage with this topic because I feel like there's nothing left. So my engagement with Bondi in this very strange way has just been, right, get down to work, get down to business, do what needs to be done, do this petition, start lobbying for the petition, deal with I can't, do you know, Javi, I still haven't had a good cry over Bondi.
Yeah, I
The
believe you.
closest I got was after the JCA function when I looked at those movies at the video. Honestly, I'm horrified that was around the corner from where I live, that was that was Australia. That's the place that all our relatives fled the Holocaust to come and be safe. Like, I can't, Israel, you know, you expect it, but what has got into this country, especially when enough of us were warning our government every day that something like this would happen and telling them what they needed to do to avoid this. You know, stop using the word Islamophobia in the same sentence as anti-Semitism, for starters, elbow. Start calling out hate preachers, start calling out hate speech, you know, start taking action.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking back to when me and you met for the first time. We went for a coffee. It was the end of the year, it was maybe November 2025, I think.
Yeah, maybe. It was definitely the end of 2025. I remember that coffee so well. And
My
I
little
remember just
baby.
thinking, oh, you're just a powerhouse. Like, you're just getting stuff done. You're just on it. I was already so exhausted. I'm like, I felt bad that you were sitting with this tired old woman. And I'm like, you've just got all this energy and you're unstoppable.
You, but not at all. No, I loved our conversation. I remember time went by very quick, and I remember him throwing all the splendors and all the spoons. And then he wanted the honey, and you were like, don't give him honey. He can't have honey because, you know, babies are not supposed to have honey. He didn't have the honey. And we were discussing kind of the problems a little bit that's been going on and, you know, how we responded. And I was sharing with you about the Empowered Jew, and I already kind of knew what you were doing, but you were telling me more like what you've shared now with all of us and the background to how you got into what you are doing. And never in my wildest imagination, I would think that less than 2 months later, I think it was, that I would then be at Bondi on top of my delicious little baby, and that people meters away from me would be shot dead and critically injured, and that I would be there. And I think I have a lot of disassociation, and I think that's probably maybe a coping mechanism. And I do get triggered by especially for me, it's loud noises more than anything, because of the gunshots that were flying past and the noises that were going on. I mean, my baby I was on top of him trying not to suffocate him when it's 29 degrees, and he's shrieking on the top of his lungs, and his face is so red like a tomato, and he has sweat dripping down his face. I'll never forget. It looked like there was like literal water coming down, and because I was on top of him and praying to God, holding a donut crate, thinking, what the hell is happening? Hearing the sirens, the police sirens, and hearing people shriek as well, and the Hanukkah music as well in the background, but the gunshots. But I guess for me, I feel like I have no choice, that God obviously put me there for a reason, and that I need to use my voice, because so many people unfortunately can't use their voice and are really suffering and struggling. I was just speaking to Shoshana Eisner, who runs Operation Golda, but also now works for Jewish House. And she was saying so many people are deeply traumatized from people who are at the event, but also people who are at other Hanukkah events. And, people are screaming, there are shooters and everyone get down, or the bar mitzvah next door in the Bondi Pavilion that was on lockdown for hours, and people getting texts that there are bombs. And there's a real trauma, and our community is still reeling, and we're still really deep in the trauma.
We are. And I think the amazing thing is that people like you and Shayna and, Matilda's parents and Haya were put there. You guys, you create this very public perception, this beautiful, it's not a perception, it's a reality that Jewish people are resilient, and rather than responding with hate, you're all responding with this optimism and this beautiful light. And you guys are really taking sort of the public face of this story. But I think also we also need to talk to Australia about how traumatized people really are. And that, that for you, okay, there's lots of moments where you're just in work mode and you're doing the work and you're out there and you're speaking. But then you can hear a banging on a desk and it's a trigger. I think we also need to be very aware of the trauma that not just the Jewish community, but the whole of Sydney is feeling. And, this is the kind of thing I think we need to be working as a society to try and prevent happening again. I don't know if you saw the news this morning, Javi, but Mike Burgess has said that, we are most likely to have other attacks in this country if we don't get our act together. And I think there's a lot of work to do in this space, a lot of work to do to lobby our government, a lot of work to do to try and get the current government out of government. I think Bondi, and I don't know, sorry, I've just taken a very negative turn and I don't want to, but I think Bondi was not the wake-up call it should have been for this country. And I think we really need to make sure that Royal Commission gets some, not just the right answers, but the right suggestions in terms of action taking that takes place moving forward.
Yeah. When I did my submission for the Royal Commission, I had it with, and this is maybe me being negative, Nancy, but I was quite honest and I said, I don't know if this is actually going to help, but I know that I have agency and that I need to use my voice. But ultimately, I trust in God. I unfortunately have lost a lot of hope within the current government and within Australia. And I know that we were discussing this yesterday on the phone, how we both don't think that there really is a future for Jews here in Australia, at least for our children. And I really am not sure about a future for Jews in the diaspora in general. And you were saying how when you met Gary
and I got engaged 27 years ago. And the day that we got engaged, he told me that he didn't think our children, or most certainly our grandchildren, probably wouldn't live in this country. And I was really shocked by what he was saying. And I didn't understand why he had this thought. But Gary was working in retail clothing, and he traveled a lot in a van around Australia, and he'd been to a lot of areas where he could see what was happening in those areas. And there were there was a lot of real cultural change happening in a lot of areas. But the most concerning thing for him was this whole progressive movement where all of a sudden the shopping centres where he had shops were not allowed to display Christmas trees. And he said, they're erasing our Judeo-Christian values, which is what Australia was founded on. And it's being replaced with all this craziness. And, I just don't know if it's going to be sustainable. We're turning into England, and it's not going to go well in 30 years. And so that was 27 years ago, and he's 100% right. Of all the things I would want him to be wrong about, that would be the one. I really didn't want him to be right about this. But then again, we're crazy to think that we were not going to see another period of anti-Semitism. I mean, we were hopeful and optimistic, and obviously we lived through this, golden age post the Holocaust, where it was really socially incorrect to openly be anti-Semitic. But anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years. It was most likely never going to go anywhere. And my optimistic take on anti-Semitism is that without it, we would not exist as a people. If we were not subjected in each generation to some serious hatred, we wouldn't rise up against it or double down against it, and we would assimilate into complete oblivion. And what I'm seeing now in the face of this anti-Semitism is so optimistic in terms of Jewish strength and Jewish connectivity. And I'm seeing groups of young kids in my house who are 20, 18, who are so inherently Zionistic, proudly Jewish. They're incredible. I've had Israelis walk into my house while one of my kids was having a party, and all the music is Hebrew music, Hebrew dance music and Hebrew songs and Hatikva remixed. And they're like, what's going on? You guys are more Israeli than we are. And I think that, I really hold on to that because, and I hold on to faith because I do think God has a plan, and I think this is the plan. This is part of the plan, because we were heading in a bad direction in the diaspora. There was massive amounts of intermarriage, a lot of people just moving away from our culture, from our religion. I mean, America has its own problems when it comes to Zionism and Israel, but in Australia, we're actually amazing. We're awesome. And I think that I have to believe that this is what will make us, and this is what ensures Jewish continuity.
Yeah, a switch that we didn't want, but a switch that happened. And that is the positive of the drastic, huge change of events. Like you said, it's always been there. It's always been brewing. But in Australia, it kind of felt like before October 7th, it was one reality. And then boom, the next day it was a new reality. And that extreme switch has also been a switch and a wake-up call for our souls, our neshama.
It has, but it's been a wake-up call also for all of Australia. If you look at the popularity of Pauline Hanson's One Nation, I think that all of Australia, well, not all, but a lot of Australians are actually getting the big picture here and what's going on here. And they're seeing where Qatar, for example, is spending billions of dollars funding our university system. They're seeing that Iran was on Australian soil creating terrorist attacks. They're seeing that our immigration policy is not helping this country. They've seen Bondi, and the shift has been post-Bondi. I don't think it's just us as a Jewish community who are sensing this massive shift. I think all Australians are. And I think if you read a lot of the comments on my social media, you sense that this is an Australian problem. Yes, it's very much a Jewish problem, but it's a much broader Australian problem, and Australians are viewing it like that, and they don't like it.
Yeah. Do you believe that majority of Australians have got their head screwed on? Do you believe that that is the majority of Australians, what we call the silent majority?
I do believe that, but I also believe that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism has very much spread into the mainstream, and that our media is complicit in that, and social media is complicit in that, and well-meaning good people are being fed misinformation, and they can't make sense of it because they don't have any historical knowledge. They don't understand the facts. They don't have any nuance. So while I still believe that most people are good, well-meaning people, I think the problem is very widespread now. And I think that unless a problem affects people personally, unless they have skin in the game, they don't care, which is why even as Jewish advocates, we need to keep pushing the point that this is an Australian problem. And this is why I've moved my content into much more Australian focused content rather than anti-Semitism content, because I think Australia needs to know that this country is buying into some pretty dangerous Islamic narrative that's being fed to us by Iran, by Qatar, by nefarious players.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it's interesting. My approach has been to be focusing on the Jews and empowering our own.
You and I do different work. We do very different work.
Different work, but all a part of the, all
Yeah.
doing something positive and for the greater good, 100%, but from different angles. Like for me, it's about empowering the Jewish
That's right.
community, because I
And
do
that's
believe
so
in the goodness
important.
of humanity. Yeah. Oh, thank you. No, and I
No,
believe that
it
every
is. It's what I was saying, that if we don't push back against hate and double down on our Judaism and find our strength and find our pride, what do we have? That's what it's about. As this comedian said, we just have to stay alive and keep breathing. And you're helping us do that. And it's super important. There are people, I think, coming to events, lighting Shabbat candles, coming to shul, doing things that they would never have thought about doing 3 years ago, just would not have thought about doing. And I think that's an amazing thing. I think it's a really amazing thing. Even the conversations I've been having with certain non-Jewish people who are now advocates, some who are converting. Soon I'm going to be speaking with Rowan Osman, and she's a Syrian Lebanese woman who is one of our strongest advocates, and she's now converting. There are incredible. Peter Meir, the photographer who passed away at Bondi, his wife, she's converting. If that does not tell you that there is something great about our people, our culture, our religion, our outlook, I don't know what does.
Yeah. I could not agree
We're
with you
awesome,
more.
hubby.
We are so awesome, and I would not want to be a part of any other people. Now,
And you're all
I'll
welcome. If there's anyone non-Jewish watching this, join us. We're very inclusive.
We are very inclusive, although if you convert, it's not it can be tough, but it's
You don't have to
worth it.
convert. Just be our friend. That's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. That's good enough. 100%. Marnie, thank you so much. Thank you for all the incredible, important work that you are doing. And we'll put all your information in the bio, and God should give you the strength to continue. And only blessings to you and your family. Thank you so, so much.
Right back at you. I wish all those things for you. Thank you for your incredible work, your advocacy, for keeping us empowered and connected, for all you do, and for especially how you just have kept going post Bondi. You are an inspiration to me, Javi. Thank you.
Thank you.